just FYI, this is an episodic weekly TV show that only just started airing, so who knows how it's gonna pan out long term, so I'm just gonna exercise my right to do what I'd prefer to do all the time anyway, and say, no, I'm not gonna stick a number rating on this, and just say how I think it's been going so far as I've been watching it. Is that good? We good? Good, okay, anyway, if you'd like to hear me talk more about television, well, help me make enough money off this shit so I can afford to watch more television by liking, subscribing, hyping, joining the Patreon, dropping some coins in the coffee, sharing the reviews on social media, and all the other various support options available on this channel and throughout the video. Thank you. So the elevator pitch for President Curtis is that it's 2026 and Americans are now so desperate to have Obama back, or maybe just for literally anyone else to be president, that Keith David's Obama, but if he was kind of an asshole, sometimes antagonist supporting character from Rick and Morty can now qualify for his own spin-off series as main character, where the jumping off premise is basically that Rick and Morty has already established a pretty cohesive sci-fi comedy universe where stuff involving weird, wacky, monster, alien, conspiracy, X-Files type business is just kinda happening all the time and frequently features the amusingly unhinged but also not totally incapable or incompetent US president of its timeline, insisting on having an extremely hands-on involvement in a lot of it, so seeing exactly what's up with that guy the rest of the time and also what these exploits look like when the Sanchez family isn't involved could sustain a whole series. And my answer after the first 2 episodes, the series has been pre-renewed for a second season before it even aired, so apparently the studio is happy enough with it, which makes this gag from episode 1 kind of an ironic victory dance.
Well, later, nerds.
Wow, they spin off so fast.
I give it 10 episodes.
Damn, shots fired.
Hey, we ain't exactly evergreen ourselves, buddy.
It's pretty good. Yeah, it's basically a less good version of Inside Job, yes, like a lot of people predicted, but I really liked Inside Job, and I miss it, and while this is no substitute whatsoever, it's got good jokes, it's well animated, it's not doing exactly the same thing as Rick and Morty, so hey, alright. I wouldn't exactly call it a home run or anything to write home about straight away, and if there's a build-up to anything significantly bigger or more interesting than funny version of a Monster of the Week show where Keith David voices an action hero president, but that's still a pretty solid dumb comedy pitch. The base setup, at least to start, is that Curtis is this tough guy, former Marine, who's really good at playing Mr. Cool Guy President on camera, but is kind of going through it after a divorce, and by implication is throwing himself into the weird stuff going down parts of his job that other people in his administration probably could or should be handling to compensate his various performance anxieties, and just for something to do. So what if instead of playing pickup basketball or doing army ride-alongs or other stuff we've seen middle-aged politicians do in their lame duck terms in real life to prove they don't need Viagra, one of them decided to be like Blade half the time? Yeah, alright, that's a premise. He's assisted on his various adventures by a pair of sidekicks specialized respectively for magic and technology, a Secret Service operative voiced by Jim Rash who has superhuman abilities due to being half leprechaun, and a cyborg chief of staff voiced by Stephanie Beatrice who gets into arguments with her own security override protocols. Okay, alright, I buy that. There's places to go there. There's an almost comfortable warm bath familiarity to the level of evergreen topical reference pool for the comedy at play. Satire would be pushing it. And the level of violence, profanity, scatology, etc. And I mean that entirely in complimentary terms. Like episode 2 has a monster prison in the Bermuda Triangle, and Kristen Schaal shows up as a temporally displaced, hey, did history class forget to tell you I probably wasn't heterosexual version of Amelia Earhart who does air transport, and there are Slender Man and Cthulhu references, and I'm sitting back going, this feels like I'm back in 2005 when these all would have been new jokes. This feels nice. This feels familiar. Like, whereas Rick and Morty always aspired to the mindset of an already solidly adult-oriented cartoon headspace, turning darkly inward and introspective about itself, President Curtis is really much more solidly in the zone of a kid cartoon with adult jokes. In fact, apart from the direct connections, it feels more conceptually similar to an adult continuation of something like Billy and Mandy or Dexter's Lab. The general vibe I get of this is much less like the early seasons of its own progenitor series or the rest of Adult Swim even than it is like getting swept back to being a young teenager watching the quasi-edgelord liquid television spin-offs like Brothers Grunt or The Head back on MTV. So like if you're an adult animation fan looking for tonal comparisons, those, I guess. Really, a lot of the heavy lifting here comes down to Keith David, let's just be honest, who I feel like is only now finally getting actual name recognition and voice acting and everything else that he probably should have had all along as just one of the great character actors of his generation. I know a lot of younger fans have found him through more recent roles like Has Been Hotel, but he's really been great in just about everything forever, and surprise, he's really good here. But it's also on the writing side. Curtis is, at least so far, a pretty interesting example of hammering what you can charitably call an inconsistent plot demands it character from Rick and Morty into a guy who now feels pretty three-dimensional so far. Not to put too fine an obvious point on it, but even outside of animation, but yeah, especially in animation, you just don't see a lot of protagonists in genre series who'd fit the description of a black man in his mid to early 60s, the good guy, but not necessarily a perfect guy, an action hero, but he has to put the work in, smart, but emotionally and psychologically kind of a mess, etc. The fact that he's the president is a whole other layer of the gimmick, but look, even absent that, you just don't see black men, and especially not older black men, as the lead of genre shows like this, live action or animated. And that's not nothing, I don't think. You kind of have to acknowledge that. That's interesting. That's notable. Yeah. And yeah, I laughed at this. It's a funny cartoon. I think that's just about all one can reasonably ask from the Rick and Morty spin-off about the jerk-ass alternate timeline Obama fighting monsters with a robot girl and a half leprechaun. I'm gonna keep watching it for a few more episodes, so make of that what you will. I recommend giving this one a shot.